The Verith had a word for silence that had no translation in any human language. Sorvual. It meant the specific quiet that follows the death of something that was never supposed to die. Not the silence after a storm. Not the silence after a gunshot. The silence after a god falls, when the universe itself forgets, for one horrible moment, how to continue. That was the silence hanging over the city of Ethonvel on the morning the Carathian fleet appeared above the clouds. Commander Isara stood on the observation platform of the high spire and watched the sky turn wrong. There was no other word for it. The sky simply turned wrong. The light bent in places it should not bend. The clouds parted not from wind but from pressure, deep, massive, invisible pressure. And then the ships came through. Not dropping, not descending, simply arriving, the way nightmares arrive, fully formed and ancient. She counted 11 vessels before she stopped counting. Not because there were only 11, because after 11 the number no longer mattered. Isara was not a soldier by training. She was a Verith listener, what humans might loosely call a systems analyst, though that translation was embarrassingly crude. A listener spent decades learning to hear the patterns inside patterns. The way a city breathed. The way a civilization held tension in its infrastructure, the way a body holds tension in its jaw. She had spent 30 years learning to hear Ethonvel, the way a mother learns to hear her child, not the words but the meaning beneath the words. And right now, Ethonvel was not speaking. It had gone sorvual. "They have begun the nulling," said second voice Eirik beside her, his 4 amber eyes fixed upward, his secondary breathing membranes fluttering rapidly, the Verith equivalent of a trembling lip. "The resonance arrays are already failing. I can feel the silence spreading from the eastern districts." Isara placed one long, 7-fingered hand flat against the railing of the platform. The railing was made of Veth stone, a material the Verith had spent 400 years cultivating, a living mineral that hummed faintly when the city's energy systems were healthy. It was the color of deep ocean. It was completely, utterly still. She had never felt Veth stone go still before. Not once in 30 years. "How long do we have?" she said. It was not a question. Questions implied uncertainty. This was a request for a number, and she already knew the number was small. "The nulling spreads at the rate of the silence," Eirik said, which was the Verith way of saying, faster than anything we can outrun. "By the deep dark, Ethonvel will be a shell. By the following dawn, the shell will crack." Isara closed her primary eyes. She kept her secondary eyes open, the ones that did not see light but read thermal patterns, pressure shifts, the invisible architecture of living systems. She watched the city's heat begin to die from the edges inward, like a fire going out from the rim of its circle. She thought about the 12,000 children in the educational warrens beneath the city. She thought about the water systems and the oxygen looms and the 300,000 Verith who had no idea, not yet, that their sky had changed. She thought about every solution she had trained for, studied for, prepared for across 30 years of her life. And she found nothing. Every protocol assumed the resonance arrays would function. Every contingency assumed at minimum one anchor tower would remain active. Every evacuation plan assumed the sky bridges could hold charge. The Carathians had not attacked yet. They had done something more surgical, more terrible. They had simply switched off the systems that made survival possible, the way you don't kill a tree by cutting it down, but by poisoning the soil it stands in. She opened her primary eyes. "Send the distress spiral," she said. "Wideband. Every frequency we have. Every language in the registry." Eirik was quiet for a moment. "Isara, the registry includes non-allied species. It includes the unverified worlds. It includes," he paused with particular weight, "the humans." "I know who it includes," she said. "The Council will." "The Council," Isara said, very quietly, "is currently deciding whether to eat their last meal standing up or sitting down." "Send the spiral, Eirik." He sent it. That was the last moment of the old world. Everything that followed was the new one. There is a particular arrogance, Isara had always believed, in assuming that the universe organizes itself around your understanding of it. The Verith had spent centuries mapping the known species of the Concord reaches. They had cataloged biology, language, social architecture, and military capacity, with the methodical obsession of a civilization that believed knowledge was the highest form of safety. They knew the Drovani and their crystalline hive minds. They knew the Pellucid swarm and its terrifying non-individual consciousness. They knew the Serati, who communicated entirely through scent and had no concept of the written word. They had files on humans, thin files. The Verith assessment of humanity, compiled over 40 years of distant observation and 3 brief formal exchanges, ran to approximately 600 pages, which sounded thorough until you understood that the Drovani file alone was 20,000 pages, and the Drovani had been Concord members for only 12 years. The human file was mostly questions. A species that had evolved on a single wet rock orbiting an unremarkable star, had nearly destroyed that rock twice through its own decisions, had somehow not destroyed it completely, and had then, with a speed that made Verith archivists genuinely uncomfortable, developed faster than light travel not through the slow accumulation of scientific consensus, but through what appeared to be one individual having a breakdown in a research facility and accidentally discovering a new law of physics. In the process, the notes in the margin of that particular section of the human file read, methodology unclear. Results undeniable. The distress spiral reached human space in 4.3 seconds. The response came back in 11. Not an automated acknowledgement. Not a bureaucratic confirmation of receipt. A voice. A human voice, slightly distorted by the compression of the transmission, carrying an accent. Isara's translation nodes identified as originating from the North American continent, specifically a region historically called Chicago. This is Colonel Dana Reyes, commanding the 14th Expeditionary Group. We received your spiral. We're reading your coordinates. We're reading the Carathian signature above your position. We're already moving. Do not surrender your anchor towers. I repeat, do not surrender your anchor towers. We'll explain when we arrive. Reyes out. 11 seconds. Eirik turned to Isara, with all 4 eyes wide. They were already moving before they responded. They must have begun moving when the distress spiral was still traveling, Isara said, slowly. That's... Eirik searched for the word. That's not how response protocols work. No, Isara agreed. It isn't. She played the message again. She listened to the voice. Human voices, she had always found, carried emotional information in ways that were almost uncomfortably raw. The Verith modulated their emotional expression through their secondary membranes and their chromatophoric skin, not their voices, and so voice was a relatively neutral instrument for them. But this woman, this Colonel Dana Reyes, her voice carried something in it that the translation nodes flagged with a notation Isara had never seen used for incoming alien communication before. The flag read, emotional subtext, anger. Specific subtype, protective. Isara stared at that flag for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, to herself, to no one, to the still Veth stone beneath her hand. What are you? Dana Reyes had not slept in 31 hours when the spiral hit her board. This was not unusual. Dana Reyes had not slept a full night since her brother Marco was killed in the Carathian sweep of the Galleon stations 14 months ago. She had learned, in that time, to function on 4 hours and hatred, which was a combination she did not recommend but could not seem to stop using. She was 43 years old, 5'7", built like someone who had been put together under pressure and never fully decompressed. She had a jaw that her soldiers described, affectionately, as load-bearing. She had eyes the color of old coffee and a way of looking at tactical displays that her junior officers found quietly terrifying, not because she looked angry, but because she looked calculating in the specific way that meant she was already 3 moves ahead and waiting for reality to catch up. She had been a city planner before the war. Structural urban systems, specializing in crisis-resilient infrastructure, which was the kind of background that meant absolutely nothing in a military context until suddenly it meant everything. The 14th Expeditionary Group was not, technically, a frontline combat unit. They were officially a rapid systems restoration team, sent in after combat to stabilize infrastructure, restore power grids, get water running, keep civilian populations alive in the chaos that followed military action. The unofficial version of what they did was go in when everything is broken and make it less broken before the people inside it die. Dana had made it less broken on 7 worlds in 14 months. She had stopped counting the dead she hadn't reached in time. When the Verith spiral hit her board, she did not wait for authorization. This was technically a violation of 3 separate protocols and 1 standing order. She had done the calculation in the 6 seconds between receiving the signal and issuing the order to move, and the calculation was simple. Authorization would take 19 minutes minimum. The Carathian nulling spread at a rate that would kill Ethon Vel's life support systems in approximately 4 hours. 19 minutes spent waiting was 19 minutes of irreversible systems failure. She issued the order. Then she sent the response. Then she called her team together in the main bay of the Concordance 7. Their transport, a battered, ugly ship that looked like someone had built a city block and then taught it to fly, and she stood in front of 212 people and said, Verith City. Carathian nulling in progress. Estimated 4 hours to total life support failure. 300,000 civilians. We are the only RSR unit within response range. Silence. Then Sergeant First Class Tobias Webb, a large, quiet man from rural Georgia who had once repaired a planetary water filtration system using components from 3 different alien technologies he had never seen before, raised his hand. Do we know anything about Verith infrastructure? 600 pages of Concord registry notes, Dana said, which is approximately 580 pages, less than I'd like. What's our approach vector? We go in through the nulling boundary. The Carathians create a resonance suppression field. It kills Verith systems because Verith systems are tuned to a specific harmonic range. Our systems operate on different principles.
She paused.
In theory. Webb looked at her. In theory. Carathians have never nulled a world with active human infrastructure on it, Dana said. So yes, in theory. Another silence. Longer this time. 212 people running the same calculation she had run. Then technical specialist Amara Osei, 26 years old, the youngest member of the team, the one who had grown up in Accra fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixable because her family couldn't afford to replace them, raised her hand. I'm in. And one by one, in the way of people who have already decided but are waiting for someone else to say it first, every hand in that bay went up. Dana Reyes looked at her people. She felt the thing in her chest that she had no name for, not pride exactly, not love exactly, something that sat between the two like a country, without a map. Caro, she said, a word her grandmother had used, a small word meaning then let's go, there's no point standing here. We've got 4 hours. Let's use them. The Carathians were not, by any reasonable definition, evil. This was the thing that made them so difficult. They were the corrective fleet of the Carathian governance sphere, a civilization built on a philosophical foundation so internally consistent, so logically structured, that its conclusions were genuinely horrifying without any of its individual members being genuinely cruel. They believed in systemic correction, the principle that any civilization exhibiting what they called resonance dissonance, essentially, any civilization that organized its society in ways the Carathian models deemed unstable, was a threat to the broader ecological balance of the galaxy, and therefore required correction. Correction meant, stop the unstable systems. Replace them with stable ones. If the population refused to be corrected, correct the population's ability to refuse. The Verith had recently achieved resonance dissonance status by developing a new form of cultural exchange that the Carathian models flagged as a destabilizing influence on 3 neighboring civilizations. The cultural exchange was poetry. Specifically, a new form of Verith poetry that used structural mathematical paradox as an artistic device, poems that contained logically irresolvable tensions that the Verith found beautiful and the Carathians found genuinely threatening, because the Carathian worldview had no category for productive irresolution. A system that could not resolve was a system that was failing. In the Carathian models, a poem that refused to conclude was an act of war. None of this was known to Dana Reyes as the Concordance 7 broke through the upper atmosphere of Ethon Vel's orbital shell and hit the nulling boundary. The ship shuddered. Every Verith standard instrument on board went dark. 3 of Dana's team members with Verith-compatible implants grabbed their heads as the implants threw errors. The lights flickered. Dana did not grip the armrests. She placed her hands flat on her thighs and watched the instrument panel and waited. The human standard instruments held. "We're through," said her pilot, Lieutenant Vera Souza, with the particular calm of someone who has trained for years for a moment and is now living inside it. "Nulling boundary is behind us. Human systems nominal. Verith comms.
Dead.
But I'm reading their emergency broadcast frequency. It's old tech, pre-resonance." Vera paused. "It's Morse adjacent. Someone down there switched to analog." Dana felt something that might have been respect. "Can you patch me through?" "Already done." Dana leaned toward the comm, Commander Isara. "This is Colonel Reyes. We are inside your atmosphere. We are reading your city's system signature. I need you to understand something before we land. We are not going to fight the Carathians today. We're going to make that irrelevant. Can you understand me?" Static. A long, strange pause during which Dana imagined the Verith on the other end processing the translation, processing the voice, processing the sheer improbability of a human ship appearing inside a nulling field with its systems intact. Then a voice, precise, slightly musical, carrying overtones that Dana's eardrums couldn't fully parse, but her chest somehow could. "We understand you, Colonel. We do not yet understand what you mean. But we're listening. Of SYMJHY from now on, just trust the process," Dana said. "We'll explain everything on the ground." She clicked off the comm and turned to Tobias Webb. "Tell me you've figured out Verith infrastructure from 600 pages in the last 2 hours. Webb held up a tablet. On it was a hand-drawn diagram. Messy, cross-referenced, annotated in 3 colors.
"Not all of it," he said.
"But enough of it. What's the key?" "Their systems aren't technological in the way ours are. They're more like," he searched for the word, "cultivated."
"Grown."
"The anchor towers aren't machines. They're more like living structures that learn to do machine things. The nulling doesn't break them. It makes them forget." Dana stared at him. "It makes them forget." "Yeah. So, we need to help them remember." Webb looked at his diagram. "Something like that. But Dana, the way Verith systems remember isn't the way our systems remember. For us, memory is storage. For them, memory is," he tapped the diagram, "relationship. The towers remember by re-establishing connection to each other. The nulling severed those connections. But the towers themselves are still there. The knowledge is still there. It just doesn't know where to go." Dana looked out the viewport at the city below them. It was still beautiful, even dying. A sprawling thing of curved towers and flowing walkways and deep green living spaces. A city that looked like it had been grown rather than built, which, she now understood, was exactly what had happened. "So we're not fixing a machine," she said. "No," Webb said. "We're healing a relationship." Webb nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." Dana was quiet for a moment. And then she said something none of her team expected. She said, "I know how to do that." Isara met them on the landing platform of the 3rd Meridian, which was one of the few areas of Ethonvel still receiving trickle power from the last partially functional anchor tower, Tower 7 Ward, which the Verith maintenance crews had been feeding energy from their own bodies in shifts, a practice that was slowly killing them and was not discussed. She had prepared herself for the humans. She had reviewed the file again on the way down. She had reminded herself that Verith's xenological protocol demanded she maintain composure and project the appearance of reasoned calm regardless of internal state. She was not prepared for Dana Reyes. Not because Dana was frightening, though she was in the specific way that a controlled fire is frightening, not from chaos but from its absence. She was not prepared because Dana walked off the ramp of that ugly ship and the first thing she did was not extend a greeting protocol or present credentials or perform any of the 17 standard first contact behaviors the Verith registry listed for human diplomats. She walked straight to the Vethstone railing at the edge of the platform, placed her hand flat against it, and closed her eyes. For approximately 4 seconds, Dana Reyes stood very still with her hand on dead Vethstone. Then she opened her eyes and turned to Isara. "Your city grieves," she said. Isara's secondary breathing membranes fluttered involuntarily. No alien had ever said that to her. No alien had ever understood that to say. "You can feel that?" My grandmother's hands could read buildings, Dana said, matter-of-factly. She said every structure holds the emotional residue of the people who built it. I thought she was being poetic until I started working in crisis infrastructure and realized she was being literal. She removed her hand from the railing. I'm not saying I have your abilities. I'm saying the grief is so strong, even my limited perception can feel it. This city doesn't want to die. No city wants to die, Isara said carefully. No, Dana agreed. But not every city knows it's dying. Yours does. Which means the living architecture is still conscious. Which means Tower 7 Ward isn't just holding on, it's holding on deliberately. It's choosing to survive. Isara looked at Eirik. Eirik looked at Isara. This was a level of insight into Varith systems theory that most Varith listeners took years to achieve. How do you know this? Eirik said. Dana looked at him with those old coffee eyes. Because I've watched cities die and I've watched cities survive, and the ones that survive always have a part of them that refuses to accept the ending. That refusal is the mechanism. That's what we're going to use. She turned and waved Webb forward. He came with his hand-drawn diagram and his careful, unhurried manner, and he spread the diagram on the surface of a portable table his team had set up with a speed that suggested they had set up portable tables in worse conditions than this. Here's what I think is happening, Webb said. Your anchor towers are a network. The nulling didn't destroy the towers. It severed their ability to recognize each other. They're all still there, still alive, still capable, but each one now thinks it's alone. And a system that thinks it's alone eventually stops trying. Isara studied the diagram. It was crude by Varith standards, human hands and human understanding applied to something that was fundamentally not human. And yet, this line here, she said, pointing, between Tower 7 Ward and Tower Northaven. You drew this as a primary connection, yes? Highest pre-nulling traffic in the network, Webb confirmed. Whatever 7 Ward is, Northaven was its closest. What would you call it? Partner? Counterpart. We would call it its other voice, Isara said. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her, some old, professional understanding reshaping itself into a new form. The towers remember through relationship. Tower 7 Ward is still active because it has not yet accepted that its other voice is gone. If Tower 7 Ward could reach Northaven, just reach it, make contact, even weakly, the recognition cascade would propagate through the whole network, Webb finished. They looked at each other. A Varith listener and a human infrastructure engineer from rural Georgia, separated by everything, biology, history, culture, the incomprehensible distance between their stars, recognizing, in this one specific moment, that they had arrived at the same place from different directions. 2 problems, Isara said. Tower Northaven is 3 kilometers from here, in the deep dark district. The nulling is heaviest there. And our teams are exhausted. We have no one to send. You don't need to send your teams, Dana said. She turned to her people, who were already sorting equipment with the focused efficiency of people who had done this many times before. We'll go. Into the heaviest point of the nulling? Isara said. Your instruments will fail. Your equipment will. Our instruments are already recalibrated for nulling boundary conditions, Dana said. We went through it on the way in. We know what it does to our systems, and we know what it doesn't do.
She paused.
Caro, the question isn't whether we can go. The question is whether you have a way to tell us what to do when we get there. Isara looked at her for a long time. Then she said, I will come with you. Eirik made a sound that, in human terms, would have been an alarmed exhale. Isara, you are the senior listener. If something happens to you, if something happens to Ethan Vel, what exactly do you imagine I will be senior listener of? Isara said very gently. She turned back to Dana. I will guide you through the tower. You will provide the system's knowledge and the equipment. Together, perhaps, we can give 2 towers back their voices. Dana nodded once. Simple. Final. Then let's go. No one lived in the deep dark district now. 3 hours ago, 30,000 Varith had lived there. Artists, philosophers, the custodians of the great unresolved poetry archives that had, indirectly, brought the Carathian fleet here in the first place. They had evacuated when the nulling reached its heaviest saturation, moving inward toward the city's core and columns that Isara had watched from the high spire, a slow, dark river of people carrying what they could and leaving what they couldn't. What they had left behind was a district that felt like a held breath. The architecture was different here. Older. The towers were grown from a darker variety of Vethstone, deep charcoal blue, almost black, pulsing faintly with bioluminescent veins that were now, under the nulling, dim and irregular, like a heartbeat that had forgotten its rhythm. Dana walked through it with her hand touching the walls intermittently, reading what she could through limited human perception, mapping the emotional residue of a place that had been lived in and loved for centuries and was now, for the first time in its history, empty. This district, she said to Isara beside her. The poetry archives. Is this where your unresolved poetry form originated? It is, Isara said. She was watching the dim veins in the walls with her secondary eyes, reading the thermal pattern of a city trying to stay alive. You know of it? I know it's why they came, Dana said. She said it without particular emotion, which somehow made it land harder. A poem that refuses to end triggered a correction fleet. She paused. I want to understand that. It is difficult to explain to someone whose art form has a concept of resolution built into it, Isara said. For humans, a story ends. A song concludes. For us, the highest art is the one that cannot end, that continues to generate meaning beyond its last word. To us, that is not instability. That is life. A living thing does not conclude. It continues until it cannot. Dana was quiet for a moment. They moved through a narrow passage between two towers, Webb and Osei just behind them with equipment packs, two other team members flanking. The Carathians think irresolution is pathological, Dana said. Yes. And you think resolution is? Death, acknowledged, Isara said. Not feared, but acknowledged. Dana stopped walking. Isara stopped beside her. My brother died 14 months ago, Dana said. She said it the way she said tactical facts, clear, unadorned, stripped of decoration. Carathian sweep of the Galleon stations.
I have not, she paused.
Something moved across her face that Isara's secondary eyes read as a heat pattern she had never seen in an alien before, complex, layered, old. I have not concluded that. I do not know if I ever will. Isara looked at her for a long moment. In our understanding, she said carefully, that would not be pathological. No, Dana said. In your understanding, that would be art. A silence. Not sorvual. Something different. Something that had space in it rather than absence. Then Amara Osei, from behind them, said very quietly, I think I'm seeing Tower Northaven. They all looked. It rose at the end of the passage, vast, dark, its bioluminescent veins almost entirely extinguished, a structure that had been alive and conscious and connected for 400 years and was now, under the weight of the nulling, very slowly forgetting what it was. Dana looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, Caro, let's remind it. Tower Northaven's entry chamber was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was cold the way an empty house is cold. Not absence of warmth, but presence of emptiness, which is a different thing, a heavier thing, something that presses against the chest and makes the body want to be smaller. Webb unpacked the interface equipment with methodical calm while Osei ran preliminary readings on the tower's internal state. Isara stood in the center of the chamber with her hands pressed to the floor, the Verith listener's primary method of systems reading, direct contact with the living structure, and she was very still, which in a Verith meant she was working with complete intensity. What do you feel? Dana said. It is present, Isara said. Barely. It knows it exists, but it does not know what it is for anymore. The nulling does not destroy. You were right about that. It removes context. Northaven remembers its own existence, but has forgotten that its existence has meaning beyond itself. Dana crouched and placed her hand on the floor beside Isara's. She was quiet. Like isolation, she said. Yes. Prolonged isolation does the same thing to humans, Dana said. We start to forget what we're for. We need We need to be seen by something outside ourselves to remember we're real. She paused. Not dependence. Just confirmation. The way sound needs air. Isara looked at her. Dana's hand on the floor beside her own. A human hand, strange-shaped, warm, insufficient by Vareth standards for structural reading, and yet somehow correct in its placement. You understand this from experience, Isara said. From 14 months of not concluding, Dana said quietly. Then, without changing tone, what does Northaven need to remember first? Its name, Isara said, which in Vareth Systems language is not a label. It is the record of every connection it has ever maintained, every tower it has spoken to, every moment of city memory it has carried. She hesitated. But accessing that record requires a harmonic input that under the nulling, I cannot generate alone. My abilities are suppressed. I can read, but I cannot speak. What does speaking require? A resonant frequency, specific to this tower. It is, Isara paused. It is almost musical, a tone that the tower recognizes as its own language. Dana turned to Webb. Can we generate it mechanically? Webb was already calculating. What frequency range? Isara gave a value in the Vareth measurement system that Webb stared at for a moment, then converted rapidly. His expression shifted. That's in the infrasonic range. Below human hearing. But, yeah, we can generate it. Structural resonance emitter, tuned down. He pulled a device from his pack that looked, to Isara's considerable bewilderment, like nothing so much as a large metal cylinder with a dial on it. Give me 3 minutes. We have less than 2 hours before life support fails citywide, Dana said. 2.5 minutes, Webb said. Dana stood up and walked a slow circuit of the entry chamber, reading the walls with her hands, mapping what she could feel. Osei was running cable along the base of the nearest structural column, her young face focused and calm in the way of someone doing something genuinely difficult and choosing not to be afraid of it. Specialist Osei, Dana said. Colonel. How are you doing? Osei considered this with the particular seriousness of someone not accustomed to being asked. Honestly, it's the most interesting problem I've ever worked on. Dana looked at her. Good. Hold on to that. Done, Webb said. 2 minutes 40 seconds. He held up the cylinder. Ready to test. He activated the emitter. The sound was below hearing, but Isara felt it the way you feel the lowest register of an organ, not as sound but as presence, as a weight in the sternum. And she felt, almost simultaneously, the most delicate of responses from the tower around them. The bioluminescent veins in the walls pulsed. Once. Faint as a breath. It heard that, Isara said, very quietly. Can you read what it needs next? Dana said. Isara pressed her hands harder to the floor. She listened with the full depth of 30 years of training, pushing through the suppression of the nulling the way you push through deep water, not with force, with patience, with specific deliberate attention. She heard it. Faint. Fragmentary. A memory of a voice. 7 words voice. It is looking for Tower 7 ward, she said. Even now, even this diminished, it is still looking. Then we give it a direction, Dana said. She turned to Webb. Can you modulate the emitter to carry a signal? Specifically, can you make it carry the tonal signature of 7 words output? The residual pattern we're still reading from the active tower. Webb stared at her. You want to give Northaven the sound of 7 words voice. I want to give Northaven proof that 7 word is still there, that the connection still exists, that it isn't alone. Dana looked at the walls around them, at the faint irregular pulse of living stone trying to remember itself. HFY. From this moment on, that's what this is. Not a repair, not a reboot, a reminder. Webb looked at his equipment, looked at the readings Osei was feeding him, looked at the modulation options on the emitter. Yeah, he said quietly. I can do that. The modulation took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. In that time, Isara sent a tonal update to Eirik through the analog broadcast system, letting him know Tower Northaven still existed. 3 of Dana's team outside maintained a perimeter, not against the Carathians, who had not yet sent ground forces, but against the nulling secondary effect, which was structural instability in older buildings as their living components lost cohesion. 2 buildings in the outer district had already partially dissolved. The team's job was to make sure nothing dissolved on top of them. Dana spent those 4 minutes doing something Isara found unexpected. She sat down on the floor.
Not to work.
Not to read the walls. She sat with her back against the base of a structural column, her knees drawn up, and she was very still, with her eyes closed. Isara, who was still in reading contact with the floor, asked, "What are you doing?" "Thinking," Dana said. "About the tower?" "About Marco," Dana said. Her voice was the same as always, level, clear. But something under it had shifted, like a geological thing, like tectonic. He was an infrastructure engineer too. Before he was a soldier. We used to argue about the philosophy of it. He thought systems were fundamentally about efficiency. I thought they were fundamentally about relationship. We never resolved it. A pause. Of SY and JHY, from this moment, I think I know which one of us was right. Isara watched her. Watched the thermal patterns of her face. Complex and old, and very human. "You are carrying him," Isara said. "Not a question." "I'm carrying the argument," Dana said. "The argument isn't concluded." She opened her eyes. "That's the art, isn't it? The unresolved thing that keeps generating meaning." Isara was very quiet. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly the art."
"Ready," Webb said.
They both stood. He activated the modulated emitter. The sound was still below hearing, but this time it carried something inside it, a pattern inside the pattern, the recorded tonal signature of Tower 7 word extracted from Osei's remote readings and translated, imperfectly, through human technology into an approximation of a Verith Tower's voice. The chamber went absolutely still. Then the Veth stone walls began to glow. Not faintly. Not with the irregular pulse of a dying system. Full, steady, deep oceanic blue, flooding from the floor upward, racing through the bioluminescent veins with the urgency of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has finally been given permission to respond. Isara dropped to her knees and pressed both hands flat to the floor and felt it. Felt the cascade of returning recognition. Felt North Haven remember its name. Felt the flood of city memory return through its structure, for 100 years of connection and continuity rushing back in a wave that was so large and so sudden that she made a sound she did not intend to make. A sound that, in human terms, was a sob. Dana Reyes was beside her, in one step.
Not to speak.
Not to interfere. Just beside her. "The towers are reconnecting," Osei said, her voice high with controlled excitement. "I'm reading resonance propagation. Tower 7 word is responding. The connection it's forming. It's not complete, but it's forming." "How long to full propagation?"
Dana said.
"If the cascade holds, 30 minutes. Maybe less. The towers want to reconnect. They're..." Osei paused, struggling with the description. "They're reaching for each other." Dana looked down at Isara. "Can you stand?" Isara stood. Her primary eyes were wet, which was the Verith equivalent of what tears were doing to Dana's face, which was nothing visible, which was its own kind of art. "We need to get back to the high spire," Isara said. "I need to be there when the cascade completes. There are protocols. I need to guide the city back to full function. The systems will need a listener to help them reorient." "Then we go," Dana said. She turned to her team. "Move out.
Fast.
We have 30 minutes. The Carathian Correction Commander was named Veth Soren, a designation rather than a personal name, as Carathians did not believe in the concept of individual identity beyond functional role. Veth Soren was the role of correction, and the being who inhabited it had inhabited it for 40 years, which in Carathian terms meant they had been correction for 40 years without interruption, without personal history, without any identity that was not the mission. The mission was running correctly. The nulling was progressing within predicted parameters. The Verith city below was losing cohesion at the expected rate. The species would reach a point of systemic collapse within 1.5 hours, at which point, the correction fleet would descend and implement the stabilization protocol, which would restructure Verith society along lines the Carathian models deemed stable. The unresolved poetry would end. The paradox art would be discontinued. The infection of productive irresolution would be removed from the local galactic ecosystem. The models predicted this as the optimal outcome. Veth Soren was therefore experiencing an unfamiliar processing state when the sensor analyst reported an anomaly. Correction, Commander. Tower North Haven has reactivated. A pause. The concept required reprocessing. That is not within the predicted parameters.
No.
Additionally, Tower 7 Ward is showing increased output. A resonance cascade appears to be propagating. A longer pause. Towers 4, 7, and 11 are reactivating. The cascade is accelerating. Veth Soren processed this. What is the source of the reactivation signal? Unknown technology. Origin, non-verith. Cross-referencing. The signal architecture is a very long pause. Human. Veth Soren was silent. The human file was even thinner than the verith file in the Carathian registry. 40 years of distant observation. 6 first contact records. 1 footnote about the faster-than-light discovery that the Carathian archivists had classified as statistical anomaly because the methodology was so irregular it didn't fit any recognized scientific category. Carathian nulling frequency. Veth Soren said slowly. What is the current resonance suppression level over the tower district? Unchanged. Full suppression is maintained. Then how are the towers reactivating within full suppression? Another pause. The human signal does not operate on the suppressed frequency range. That is, Veth Soren stopped. Processed. That is because we calibrated the nulling for verith range resonance. Yes. And human systems operate outside that range. Yes. The human systems are not affected by the nulling. That appears to be correct. Veth Soren looked at the display showing Tower North Haven blazing back to full illumination below, the cascade spreading through the city, like a tide coming in. The Carathian models had not predicted this. Not because the possibility was illogical, but because the possibility had never been considered. The nulling had been deployed against 17 civilizations. None of them had been aided by a species that operated on a fundamentally different technological frequency. None of them had called for help from somewhere so far outside the predicted response space. The models did not have a correction protocol for this. Veth Soren looked at the display for a long time, then said, "Open a communication channel to the human vessel." Dana was 3 blocks from the high spire when her comm activated on the Carathian frequency, a channel she had never used but had always had listed in her system because intelligence officers believed in having the numbers of people you hoped never to call. She stopped walking. Her team stopped with her. She looked at the comm unit for exactly 1 second, then answered. The voice that came through was precise and slightly mechanical, not from transmission distortion but from a genuine quality of a speaker, the voice of something that had spent 40 years being a function rather than a person. Human officer. I am Veth Soren, Correction Commander of the 1st Carathian Governance Fleet. You are currently assisting a corrected civilization in resisting its correction. You are aware this places you in conflict with the governance sphere. I'm aware, Dana said. You are also operating inside an active nulling field with fully functional technology. This is not something our models predicted. I know, Dana said. A pause. Longer than she expected from something that claimed to be a correction function. Why did you come here? Dana looked at the comm unit. She looked at Asara beside her, who was listening to the Carathian transmission with her secondary eyes narrowed in an expression that Dana was learning to read as complex attention. She looked at Webb, who had his hand diagram folded in his jacket pocket. She looked at Osei, who was 26 and from Accra and had fixed things that weren't supposed to be fixable her whole life. She said, because someone asked. Another pause. That is the complete reason? Someone sent a distress signal. We were the closest RSR unit. People were going to die. Dana said it the way she said all tactical facts. Clear, undecorated. That's the complete reason. Your civilization had no political alliance with the verith. No treaty obligation. No strategic interest in this system.
No.
Then by what principle did you act? Dana considered this. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer deserved to be said carefully to something that thought in systems and models and corrections. There's a principle in human infrastructure work, she said finally. When you're assessing a damaged system, there's always a moment when you have to decide, is this system worth saving? Not can it be saved? Worth saving. And the criterion we use isn't efficiency. It isn't strategic value. It's, does this system generate something the world needs that it can't generate without the system? If yes, you save it. And the Verith generates something the world needs. They're poetry, Dana said.
Yeah.
They're impossible poems. The ones that don't resolve. She paused. The universe is full of systems that try to correct irresolution. Reduce it. Eliminate it. The Verith made art out of the refusal to be resolved. That's something. That's genuinely something. Of SYMJHY, from my perspective, a universe without that is a poor universe. And I'll work in poor infrastructure. I won't work in poor universes if I can help it. The Carathian was silent for a long time. Not processing silent. Isara, watching the comm unit with her full perceptive capacity, said very quietly to Dana, something is happening to them. I don't know what it is. But it is not calculation. Colonel Reyes, Veth Soren said at last. The Carathian models do not have a category for what you're describing. I know, Dana said. Caro, that might be something worth looking at. The cascade completed at 6 minutes to the life support deadline. Isara was in the listener's seat at the apex of the high spire when it happened, the seat she had occupied thousands of times for routine system readings, now filled with the most profound listening she had ever done. Her hands were deep in the interface channels, her full perceptive capacity extended through the living architecture of Ethon Vel, and she felt it the way a musician feels the moment an orchestra finds its key. First Tower 7 Ward, already burning bright. Then North Haven, blazing back with the memory of itself, 400 years of city consciousness flooding back into its structure. Then the cascade, tower by tower, each one recognizing the next, the network of relationships rebuilding itself like a conversation picking up after a long silence, a little halting at first, a little uncertain, and then with gathering confidence, with the specific joy of a system remembering what it is for. The lights came back in the city. Not all at once. Sector by sector. The bioluminescent veins of the buildings filling with deep blue-green light, the Vethstone railing beneath Isara's hands beginning to hum, first faintly, and then with the full, rich resonance of a city that had remembered it was alive. The water systems restarted. The oxygen looms re-engaged. The sky bridges charged and stabilized. Eirik, standing behind Isara, made no sound for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, in the old language that the Verith used only for the most profound things, Ethon Vel remembers its name. Dana Reyes was standing at the base of the spire with her team, and she felt the Vethstone under her boots shift from dead to alive in a single instant, and the sensation moved through her soul and up her leg and into her chest, and she stood very still and let it move through her, and she thought about Marco, and she thought about arguments that never conclude, and she thought about what it means to be a system that generates something the world needs. Osei grabbed her arm. Colonel.
Look.
The Carathian fleet was moving. Not descending. Not deploying ground forces. Moving laterally. Repositioning. Away from their correction formation. Dana's comm activated. Vera Souza from the Concordance, 7 in orbit. Colonel, the Carathian fleet is altering course. They're not retreating, but they're not moving to correction position either. They're just holding. What did you say to them? I don't know yet what I said to them, Dana said. I know what I meant. Her comm activated again. Veth Soren. Colonel Reyes. The Carathian governance sphere is entering a procedural review period regarding this system. This is unprecedented. Correction operations are suspended pending review. I cannot explain the full reasoning of this decision, as the reasoning is not yet complete. Dana looked at the sky. The wrong sky, the heavy sky, the sky that had turned wrong on the morning all this began. It was still full of Carathian ships. But the light was different. The ships were still. What changed, she said. Your concept of unresolved systems generating ongoing value, Veth Soren said. It was introduced into the Carathian models for evaluation. The models are running. They have not reached a conclusion. Dana felt something loosen in her chest. How long will they run? Unknown. The The model entered a state the analysts are calling a pause that contained something almost human in it. Productive irresolution. Dana stared at the comm unit. Then she looked at Isara, who had come down from the spire and was standing beside her, and Isara's secondary eyes were bright, and her primary eyes were wet again, and they looked at each other across the incomprehensible distance between their species and their stars and their griefs and their understandings. "They're running an unresolved poem," Dana said. "Yes," Isara said. "I believe they are." 3 days later, Dana Reyes sat in the archive room of the Deep Dark District and read an unresolved Vareth poem.
Or tried to.
The translation was imperfect. Isara had worked with her for 2 hours to build a framework that could carry at least the emotional architecture of the thing, even if the mathematical paradox at its heart couldn't fully survive the crossing between languages. The poem was 1,200 years old. It had been written by a Vareth listener whose name translated, approximately, as the one who stays when others leave. It was about a city that survived a catastrophe. It was about what the city remembered and what it lost, and how those two things coexisted without resolving into a single feeling. It was about the specific quality of life that continues after the moment when it should have ended. It did not conclude. It opened at the end into a space of ongoing possibility, a last line that was structured as a question directed at whoever was reading it, a question that changed depending on the reader, a question that was, Isara had told her, different for every Vareth who had ever read it. For Dana Reyes, the question the poem asked was, "What do you carry that still speaks?" She sat with that for a long time in the quiet of the recovered archive room, with the deep blue-green light of the restored city moving through the walls around her, with the hum of Vethstone that had remembered itself under her hands. She thought about Marco, about the argument, about systems and relationships, and the philosophy of infrastructure. He would have had so much to say about all of this. He would have argued with her for hours about whether the Vareth Towers were more accurately described as relational systems or as individual entities in relationship. He would have brought citations, which Dana never did, and she would have beaten him anyway on the strength of the direct perceptual evidence, which always drove him crazy. The argument was not concluded. It was still running. And she sat with this slowly, carefully. It was generating something. Not just grief. Not just loss. Something. The specific shape of Marco's thinking still present in the way she thought, the way she worked, the way she had walked into a dying alien city and understood, before she could have explained how she understood, that the problem was one of relationship, not mechanics. HFY. From this moment on, she had a word for that. Not a human word. A word from a civilization that had been making art of irresolution for 1,200 years. She did not have the word yet. Isara had told her it would take time to learn, that Vareth words for the most important things resisted quick translation, that the word had to be earned through sitting with the concept until the concept became something you could feel rather than just define. But she could feel the edges of it. She could feel the shape of the thing the word described. Outside, the city of Ethonvel breathed. Its lights ran in their deep-sea colors through the curved architecture of a civilization that grew its buildings and loved its paradoxes and had once, in a very specific despair, sent a signal into the void with no certainty that anything would answer. Something had answered. Not because it was required to. Not because of treaty or strategy or the cold logic of mutual interest. Because someone had asked. Isara found her there an hour later, still sitting with the poem, still sitting with the question. "How does it end?" Isara said, sitting across from her. "It doesn't," Dana said. "You told me it doesn't." "I know what I told you," Isara said. "I am asking how it ends for you. What answer does your reading of it arrive at?" Dana looked at the last line. At the question directed at her specifically, differently than at anyone else who had ever read this. "What do you carry that still speaks?" "Everything that matters," she said. Isara was quiet. Outside, the city breathed. Somewhere above them, in the orbital shell, the Carathian fleet held still while its models ran an infinite computation, a question introduced into a system that had never before encountered a question it could not close. A poem without an ending, seated in the most ordered mind in the known galaxy. Isara placed her hand on the table between them, the long seven-fingered hand of a species that had built a civilization on the beauty of things that don't resolve. Dana placed her hand beside it, the human hand, strange-shaped, warm, carrying 30 years of infrastructure and 14 months of grief, and one argument that would never stop being useful. They did not speak. The city hummed around them, alive and remembered and continuing, not despite the irresolution, but because of it. Not despite what it had almost lost, but carrying it, transformed. Sorvual, the silence after a god falls. There was a word Dana was beginning to learn for the silence after the god stands back up. She didn't have it yet. She was working on it. The poem was still running.
End.